Welcome to this presentation presented by Global Voice Network. This is a roundtable discussion featuring a rotating panel of guests with decades of experience researching and uncovering truth. We just get together and chit-chat and chew the fat. And now, you're invited. I'm your host, Paul Biener. Welcome to the program. Welcome to the Think Tank. Hi, welcome to this episode of the Think Tank on Logical Thinking on bbsradio.com. I'm Paul Biener, your host, and today I am pleased to have special guests Roger Sayles and the voice of the youth with us. That's Presley. And what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about state nationals. We're going to talk about the difference between nationals and God-given right holding, possessing and exercising state nationals, and the 14th Amendment citizen who only have privileges. Did you know that the only right you have under the 14th Amendment is the right to dwell on the land? That's it. Who knew? It opens up all kinds of cans of worms. The right to travel? Nope, don't have it. First Amendment, Second Amendment protection? Nope, don't have it. It's not guaranteed. But of course, they didn't tell you that, and that's why we're here to tell you that. Hi, Roger. How you doing?
Paul, what a wonderful introduction and a nice setting and program. And yes, what we're here to try and help people do is to differentiate the things that have been intentionally in some instances and just by generality usage in others gotten confused in their minds. Okay. Rights versus privileges is one. The 14th Amendment is a perfect example because let's use this little bit of specificity. I've come to the conclusion many years ago, for the audience that isn't familiar with me, we've been researching this for 30 years. I stood on the shoulders of two other gentlemen who, between all three of us, have got more than 100, probably closer to 110 plus years of research into the conclusions that we will simplify and try and get across to you tonight to show you what's going on. Okay.
Well, early on in the program, I want to touch on something really quickly. Now you're not the only cookie in the jar.
No.
You are certainly the tastiest, because there's a lot of state, national, sovereign, this, that, and the other thing movements out there, and a lot of them are difficult. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. Some of them are really, really expensive. I mean, there's guys that are charging upwards of $100,000 just to like unwind people from the system. You know,
$100,000?
$100,000 because they do each stage individually. They rescind the voter registration, and then they undo the licensing,
which isn't needed. See,
exactly. So they're doing a bunch of stuff that isn't necessary. So now we're not speaking ill of any of those other programs. We're not judging anybody. We're just simply presenting this program here today. Now, because we may talk about something that may be construed as a legal issue or a lawful issue, this program is not intended to treat, diagnose, prevent, or cure any disease, and it's not to be accepted as medical, legal, or professional advice. This is for entertainment purposes only, and it is strongly suggested that you do your own due diligence and your own research before acting on any information presented here. However, I do think that you're going to see the wisdom in it. Let's say hi to Presley for just a second. Presley, you are a national already, right?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. And what did it take, about 20, 30 years of life to figure out that that the system was stacked against you? Or how old are you?
I'm 18 years old. I realized how messed up the system is probably when I was around 12 years old, but I didn't have this way out until the beginning of this year.
And okay. Now, so you're just barely out of high school. What is the robe still wrinkled in the closet, or what?
Well, I would be in my senior year of high school right now, but I actually graduated about 3 years ago.
15.
Yeah.
You graduated at 15.
Yeah, I really couldn't put up with school. I had to get out of there.
Well, okay. Well, then I'm in really good company because I graduated 6 months early too. I went to religious high schools, and I always blew off religion class because, I was a kid. I was a punk. I knew everything. I wasn't interested in it. What am I going to do? Am I going to go into the clergy or whatever? No, I don't think so. I don't need to do this. And then about 6 months before graduation day, I come to find out that the religion class equaled an English credit, and I didn't have enough to graduate. So I said, well, thank you very much. It's been nice knowing you. I cleaned out my locker, I got in my car, and I went and sat down and wrote the GED exam, and I graduated like that. So my hat's off to you. You actually went through, you did the work, you got the credits, you did the classes, you knuckled down, you kicked butt. I cheated. You
Oh,
kicked
no,
butt.
no, no. You're giving me too much credit. I also took a test to get out early.
Okay.
I was having I mean, I was always very good in school. I just had no patience for it. I didn't find any of the information important. I took essentially the minor's version of the GED.
Okay.
Well, they're in the schools, they teach to the bottom dwellers, as a teacher for 10 years. And by necessity, many times they have to teach to the bottom dwellers. And leaves people like you out on a limb and without letting you out and look at what you've accomplished. So, more power to you, Presley.
Yeah, thank you. It just shocked me that they still teach to the bottom dwellers in all the honors classes. Not really teaching. I don't believe that's what teaching is. It's just
No,
forcing memorization.
yeah,
Handhold.
it's conditioning. It's
Yeah,
Pavlovian
absolutely.
conditioning. Along the way, for me, one of the people that I was really, really honored to get to have looked back on and tell you this story was a guy named Brigadier General Benton Parton. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He was a great American, okay, and he was an Air Force Brigadier General, and he was the one that blew the whistle in Oklahoma City, and he was a very important man in the Air Force for many years, and he was an ardent student of communism. And I got to spend some private time with him one on one, and saw him speak and heard him speak several times. And that guy right there had it nailed. And this is what he said. One of the things he said, when we were studying fraud, they were studying Pavlov. Okay.
Mhm.
Now I'm gonna. Yeah, you've heard the question. Why won't the American people do anything? Right. Well, this is a story he told me. So this is the source. But I've told the story a number of times on the air, and people have gone to look for it and they can't find this. It's been scrubbed. But this was the source, was Brigadier General Benton Parton. Okay. And ardent student of communism. And he said Pavlov's experiments that everyone is familiar with, the ringing of the bell and the salivating of the dog, you know about this,
Yeah,
Presley,
yeah.
obviously. Okay. Well, that was stage one of the conditioned response experiment, but there were three stages. And in the second stage, they took the same dog in the same room and they conditioned him to turning on the light, and they would beat him with a stick. And he could escape the beatings because there was a board in the corner that was parallel to the floor, and he could get up under there and they couldn't beat him. But otherwise than that, they conditioned him to the turning on of the light and the beating of the stick. In the third stage of the experiment, they kept the same dog in the same room and they rang the bell and turned on the light simultaneously. What do you think the dog did?
Um, I guess run away and salivate.
Paul?
Um, yeah, I'm going to go with I'm going to go with Presley's impression.
Stood in the middle of the room and shook. Psychologists call it a catatonic state. The
Oh,
more
didn't know
you
that.
increase the conditions, the deeper the conditioning takes effect. So you wonder why Americans aren't doing anything? There's your
Mm.
answer. I
So,
believe.
so what they've got is conflicting programming that uh, that there's no way to rationalize how they would work together. So everybody just stands in the middle of the corner,
You,
shaking and pissing in themselves.
you get mixed messages. You don't know what to do.
Yeah, I've seen this often in myself and in other people that it's like different parts of our mind, of our ego, just fight with themselves, and we're stuck in paralysis because one
Yep.
part wants something and one part wants something else, and maybe you don't really want either of those parts. You've just been taught to want both of those things.
Well, maybe that leads perfectly into what we're here to talk about, which is a teaser. I don't know if the listeners that see this have any exposure to us or this message or anything else, but I would like to think I've been involved in this for 30 years personally, and I would like to think we've got the ultimate answer. As one of my really good students, Daryl, who Presley's heard, I guess, I don't know if Paul heard Daryl call in. He hadn't called in lately. And but he called in one day and he said, a Gordian knot has to be untied the way it was tied. And I believe that's what we've done. Okay. The other people that, Paul, you were alluding to earlier about complexity and cost and all the other factors of the other people that are trying to approach this Gordian knot, if you will. Okay. They don't know how to untie it. And the major reason they don't, and the advantage I've had, is my teacher, John W. Benson, our law teacher. He studied law his entire life, adult life, just because he liked it. And he studied the old law and not like going through one of our law schools. So the enemies, after they've taken control of the Federal Reserve, has started changing everything in our society. And one of the early things they did was get a hold of the organization that controls American law schools, the American Association of Colleges and Law Schools. And I can prove to you that they had total control of that organization in 1933. Okay, because they could move the convention to Chicago on New Year's Eve so that the keynote speaker could give a very indicting speech and expose it to people that were there, but nobody showed up. That's the only time they've ever done that, I guarantee you. So anyway, they've had control of this, and the guy that taught me this stuff knew the old law, and he knew the things that they've been striving to cover up so that people couldn't figure this out. And the advantage I have is I know it's the feudal system. I know the system we're fighting. I know the system they've set up. And the other people, I won't drop any names, but you guys, if you've been in this, you've probably come into contact with other people. And it's not that they're not totally wrong. It's just that they do a lot of unnecessary stuff and make it complex because they don't really understand the enemy they're fighting. They think they're playing constitutional law, and they're playing feudalism and the feudal system, and they're playing merchant law, Babylonian merchant code. We call it the UCC. And when you're playing like that, here's the analogy. Let's see, we just got finished with basketball season, right? So the feds contacted us and they challenged us to a game, winner take all. Us being the way we are, we said, okay, bring it on. We go out and practice, we get good, and the day of the game comes, and we're out there on the court in our little Nikes and our shorts, and we're out there doing layups and shooting three-point shots, and everyone gets nothing but net. Swish, swish, swish. And all of a sudden, here comes the feds. And they're coming out, but they don't have Nikes on. They got these Adidas shoes on with these long metal things on the bottom of them. And they got all these pads, and they got sticks, and they're throwing this little thing around at 120 miles an hour that's hard as steel. Who do you think's going to win that game?
The cheaters.
Okay. And that's what's been happening. We've been trying to play common law, and they've been playing merchant law, and we hadn't had access to the common law. And they don't know they're playing feudalism, where if you understand who we're playing and what the structure is, the answer and the remedy's right there. That's why this is so easy, Paul. That's why this is so different from everybody else's approach, because this is easy to do. It doesn't cost anything. Nobody's charging you. You can do it from the privacy of your own home. Okay. And the more people that do it, we band together and we get stronger with all the people that participate. If you want to participate and change your status, it's up to you. Okay. Nobody's going to tell you to do it. Everything's got to be voluntary. But as Presley learned, you have the ability to change over to the original status that the country was founded on, where you really had not civil rights, or as they're erroneously referred to now, constitutional rights, because the only rights that the Constitution gives you are the civil rights of the 14th Amendment. The other rights are God-given rights with constitutional protections, and that's what's in the Declaration of Independence, and that's what we got to get back to, and we can help you do that should you want to.
And constitutional privileges can be withdrawn or revoked at any time.
That's correct. They're a small r right for a reason, is because they're really privileges. If you go back to the Declaration, for instance, the words that are capitalized in there, and this capitalization matters because one of them is God, the other one's rights, the other one's duties, the other one's citizen. Okay. So, and there might be one or two others, but those are the main ones I remember. But yeah, these, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, words mean things, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great quote in my book, by the way, from Confucius. As we were putting it together, somebody found it. I'd never seen it. It says, when words lose their meaning, men lose their liberty.
Wow.
Okay. So we kind of put this together with Presley, and I feel like I'm hogging this, and I don't want to, because what we want to do is really, we brought Presley on here because we just love him to death, because he's such an exceptional young man. And what I found over many years, and I've been doing this a long time, okay, in one way, shape, or form or another, almost 30 years. All right. And so I've seen most of the time it's the older people that have a little life under their belt, and they've got enough to really be able to notice the changes and the stark reality of what's going on. Or else somehow they got their ox gored. Their wife divorced them. They got thrown into some kind of bankruptcy thing. They got IRS problems. They got some kind of traffic ticket. Who knows what the problem was? But there's something that made them start asking questions. But up until then, everything was fine, see? But now we've got this young man that comes on the show one day here a few months ago. And I go from listening to him talk and ask some questions. I said, Presley, first of all, what's your name? Presley. I have music business experience, so the name Presley has got special significance to me. Okay. I said, how old are you? He goes, 18 years old. I mean, I almost fell out. Okay. Here, it's always the older people, but what we're seeing is a younger generation. They got more at stake with this than we do. We've lived the good life. We've seen the best years of America had to offer, at least up to this point. And we see what's happening. These kids, they want that, and they see it deteriorating in front of their face. Isn't that right, Presley? Pretty much.
Absolutely. I'm very optimistic, but I've been optimistic for the far future of this country. For the immediate future, the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years even, I was quite apathetic, and this has definitely changed that.
Well, good. You know what? I get comments. I got it this afternoon or this evening on something. And because a lot of people have responded. I was recently on Sarah Westall, did a three-part show. We did an interview, and the response from that, including meeting Paul here, has just been phenomenal for me. Okay. And the comment that I don't get overwhelmingly, but I certainly get it enough where you recognize it, is, thank you. I've finally got some hope. And that's exactly what you're saying, Presley. And I can totally understand you and your generation's situation. And you're just so exceptional to have seen this at your age, be in the situation that you are, and to already be out there actively doing things that can make a difference with less than 120 days under your belt.
Yeah, I mean,
that's amazing.
I honestly, hope doesn't cut it. I'm ecstatic.
Well, yeah, because you know what, I've been saying for a long time, these guys have already lost. Okay.
Yeah.
That won't become obvious to people for a while. We got a few 40, as Dwayne Eddy used to say. You probably don't know this song, but I'll bet Paul does. 40 miles of bad road. This is a guitar player from the 50s. Remember that?
Well, okay. No, I was the 60s.
Okay. All right. Well, that's an old 50s song a lot of people would recognize, and that's what we got in front of us. Maybe longer than 40 miles, and it may be worse than bad. And we're going to lose a lot of fellow human beings, I'm afraid. But that's why this information is so important, because these guys are going to fall on their own petard. They've already lost. Okay. But we're the ones that are going to have to rebuild. And you got to understand these principles on how this was done to us, where the loopholes were, how they managed to wiggle around it, who these people really are. The fact you never can trust them or really even have as little to do with them as possible is the only way to rid yourself of their deceitful, conniving, devil ways. I don't know. I mean, I could string 10 adjectives right there, lying, murdering, thieving, slaving, whoring, all of it. Okay. That's who we're dealing with. And you can't trust them.
Right. So, okay. How did they, like, kind of in a nutshell, we can drill down into it deeper a little bit later, but how did they go about positioning themselves to actually turn the screws to us? Because we haven't had it too seriously bad until the last 10 or 20 years.
Well,
but it seems like they have really ramped up their attacks.
They have. And because they wanted to hit this thing at different times, they wanted to hit it in the year 2000. See, and they keep getting delayed. Here's what happens. This was the best I've come to conclude. This was probably cooked up. The Illuminati was founded. We just celebrated their birthday, or commemorated is probably a better word, on May the 1st of this year. That's the Illuminati's birthday in 1776. Obviously, this plan was part of it. Now, how deep they got into it and the development of it, we don't know and never will. But by the time you got to the early 1800s, you had the 13th Amendment passed, the original one, that they got scrubbed out to replace it with this new one, okay, which we can talk about in more depth at another time. But here's the key things. In the 1830s is when Andrew Jackson shut down the second bank of the United States. Okay, and if you're not familiar with that story, the bankers got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned Jackson and voted in favor of the Second National Bank. Did you know that, Paul?
No, I didn't know that. So you're saying the Supreme Court was crooked way back then?
Well, yeah. And when here's what Jackson said, let them enforce it. Okay. So I figured this plan was really about the same time the Rothschilds in 1837 set up Reform Judaism. And that's the mechanism that they're using to do this today. Okay. And so then you look a little bit longer and you got where they found Cyrus Scofield and the whole history of the Scofield Bible with what we call dispensationalism today and neutering the clergy. Because it was the clergy that was the main part of the revolution in 1776. Well, that was neutered, and that went back to the middle of the 1800s. So these roots go way deep, okay? And I think I could sit down, and if you spend enough time with my material, I can show you between the 13th and the 14th Amendment coupled together, where that I believe, and the conclusion I've drawn personally, is the reason that the Civil War was fought was to get those amendments in the Constitution so they could use the black man to enslave the white man and everybody else, which is exactly what's happened.
Okay, well, one of the favorite topics of this, and I have to say I was incorrect on this one point, but one of the favorite topics of this and the actual beginning of a person's slavery, people are saying that it has to do with the birth certificate. And then once the birth certificate is filed or it's signed and then it's filed, and then a death certificate is filed 30 days later, and then there's 15 days or whatever to, yeah, right. Exactly. So there's all this stuff around the birth certificate and the trust and everything else. Right. And they're saying that's where we lost our stuff.
Can we address that with the current news stories?
Well, okay.
Last fall in England, mom has baby. Hospitals testing all new babies for COVID with that long thing they stick up their nose. Baby squalling like hell. Mom objects. The nurse turns to mom and says, "You can't object. This baby's our property." That baby have a birth certificate yet?
No, that baby did not have a.
Okay, recently, within the last couple of months, yeah, you got the story there. It's on the website. That's right. Thank you, Paul. Recently, we don't have a story for this, but I did hear about it. And you might have too. A situation in Idaho with a baby named Baby Cyrus. that was taken away by 15 police officers ambushing the mother and throwing her in jail and taking the baby and throwing it into CPS care, and an absolute total 100% nightmare. Okay. And there was a hearing, an administrative hearing, and the CPS judge said in open court, baby Cyrus is the property of the state of Idaho. It wasn't created by a birth certificate, but I will tell you this, you're on the right track. A birth certificate represents the fact that you're in the condition, and then they utilize that as a commercial document called a warehouse receipt. And the warehouse receipt, now the paper represents the good it represents. So now the paper is the birth certificate. It's doubling as a warehouse receipt, and that's what's tied to the U.S. bonds and as collateral, and then your future labor is extracted through the IRS, and a third of what the IRS collects goes to debt repayment. In other words, it pays the coupon payments to the bondholders. So there's not a penny of your income tax goes to the day-to-day running of the federal government, and that comes from a presidential commission in the 80s called the Grace Commission that was commissioned by Ronald Reagan. That was a statement in there. Not one nickel of your income tax goes to the day-to-day running of the federal government.
Well, if none of your income tax goes to the running of the federal government, how do they fund it? Through black projects and
they through the bond market. See, the bond
Oh.
market's 10 times bigger than the stock market. Okay. And that's what they're out there doing, selling all these bond issues. That's the money that finances the country. Imposts and excises, legitimate taxes, those help. The other taxes, we could do a whole show on taxes because people don't usually understand it. But there's two types of taxes, indirect and direct. Income tax is direct tax. Much of the other funding comes from indirect taxes like your gasoline tax, tax on food, whatever that they're gaining it. But there's differences in those two. And this isn't the time to get into that. There's just, if you want to, we'd do a show on it though, because it's very interesting,
Yeah, well, I think it's valuable to have the backstory of how this came about, and what exactly was the vehicle that actually put somebody under the auspices of the 14th Amendment.
Okay, they usually do things in stages. Okay, because they can't do a big drastic change. They have to implement it slowly. So what they did was they set up the Civil War to get the 13th and the 14th Amendment into the Constitution. And with the 14th Amendment, they set up, they set up a federal citizenship. Now, that's important to understand because up to that point, there was no federal citizenship. And the only citizenship in the country was if you were a state citizen. And then you were a citizen of the United States of America. But there was no federal citizenship. And so the people that were born and raised in D.C. and the territories, they couldn't do anything. They weren't even part of the country because they weren't state citizens because it was a territory. So that is the loophole that they drove this first setup part of this, Paul, where they established the condition there. And that was mostly applied to blacks. And that's where, of course, you get your civil rights, okay? You were talking about those earlier. Civil rights are the rights that you have among the other people in the society, okay? And in this instance, under rights, there's two subheadings. One is civil rights, your rights with the other people, and the other is political rights, the right to run for office, the right to vote, and all that stuff. But the 14th Amendment didn't give you political rights. It just gave you civil rights. That's why they call voting a franchise, because they had to give you these because you weren't given them under the 14th Amendment, so that you could participate in the political theater that goes on up there and make you think that you're having an effect.
And really, it is just theater.
It's theater.
Your vote doesn't count, because if they were interested in what you had to say, they would not have stripped you of your rights.
How about this one? If voting matters, they wouldn't let you do it.
That's
okay.
Eloquently put.
Short and sweet. Okay. So
Yes.
anyway, that was the setup. And then that went along for a lot of years. And what people, if you're not familiar with this history, I'd like to think everybody has some familiarity with it, that you may recognize it from the term the Jim Crow laws, because that's when we had the separate white and black facilities and separate white and black cultures, but they both had a political status. One was a state citizen and the other was a federal citizen. Okay. So
Hmm.
that was the difference. And so they set this up parallel to the white citizenship, and then they switched us all over to it. It's a bait and switch, man, is all it is. Okay. A lot of their stuff is so simple, but you got to go in and understand it to understand the simplicity and, may I dare say, the brilliance of it. Okay. So the way they switched us all over to it was by getting control of the Federal Reserve Act and bankrupting the country. And in this quote unquote hypothecated bankruptcy, now we've got these people that have this status that's like a slave, a feudal slave. We'll just bring them in and they'll be the sureties for the debt. And that's when they switched the system on March the 9th of 1933. Now, if you don't believe that, or you don't remember hearing about this, it wasn't really well publicized. What was publicized were the effects of it. And the effects of it was Roosevelt seized all the gold. That's what people will remember. That was officially the bankruptcy of the United States. After the gold was seized, they opened up and everybody used paper. Remember, there was a bank holiday for 5 days. And when everything opened back up, we had this paper with this pyramid and a triangle on the back with Novus Ordo Seclorum on it, called the Great Seal. And now we're all using the paper that underneath what we didn't understand is the system changed. We're the collateral for by collateralizing our future labor to be collected through a tax mechanism. I mean, that's what's going on here. Okay.
It's all about
that pyramid says in Latin, a new order for the ages. Yes. And it has 1776, which is also the date of the founding of the organization that used the pyramid.
Yes, and then that, of course, was the founding date of our country. So there's another dialectic. This whole thing, that's a fancy college Ivy League word for opposites, okay? Everything with these people is always set at 180 degrees opposite the truth. You see it more even prevalent today. So for anybody that is confused and you get on one of these issues, you always know where to look for the answer. It's 180 degrees in the opposite direction of what you're reading or being told, and it's there every time you ever look.
Just any question you have, just Google it and take the opposite of every single hit on the first page.
Yep.
I'm serious.
This is just, this is analyzing their system. We could get into a whole nother program on where that came from, by the way. It's incredibly interesting, the roots of this stuff. But I want to hear more, and I want the audience to hear more from Presley, because one of the reasons we've got him on here is that so you folks that are older and you're maybe just seeing this information for the first time, well, there's hope here, okay? Because you can change and get out from under this crap, and you can do what the Bible commands us to do in Revelation 18, which is come out of her. Okay. You could come out of her politically. They can't do a darn thing about it, and they won't. And I've been helping people do this for 11 years. And there's never been one negative incident that's ever been reported to me by anybody that's ever done it. And I think millions of people have done this. But I want you to have the double edge hope with Presley here, this young, super impressive 18-year-old that has taken to this message and at his age gone out with initiative and wherewithal and done some amazing things. This young man that hadn't even been exposed to this for more than 120 days, I don't think.
Well, yeah, I originally heard about this in January when I took John Kasarab's class, and I really didn't have my head completely wrapped around it, so I took it again in March. And right after that, I came onto your show for the first time, and you helped clarify a lot of the places I was stuck on.
Yeah, and that's what we have, a daily radio show, and we can get people on there, multiple people, to ask questions. It's really mainly for newer people, because what they've done here is very simple. But how they've done it is extremely complex, and some people never can get their arms around it, quite frankly.
Yeah, there's two people that are close to me that have honestly probably gone over this information at least 6 or 7 times and still don't fully understand it.
Well, it's not even that they don't understand it, it's that it doesn't take with them. It doesn't seem to make any difference. And there are people that react that way. Okay. And I realize this is for a relatively small percentage. I think it's getting more. I think there's more people out there looking for the answer right now, actively, instead of me trying to have to beat them over the head with it, which is what I was doing for many years, you know. But I do know that it conforms right into biblical. And this is a way to remove yourself. And what you're doing, for the people that are new to this, I'll just give you a nutshell with a very simple process, incredibly inexpensive, cost of a postage stamp. And if a notary charges you, you don't even have to have that, is you can literally regain your God-given rights and constitutional protections with a very short 1-sentence affidavit with a cover letter to the Secretary of State. And you literally remove yourself from the jurisdiction of the federal government, with the exception of 2 very obscure sections of the Internal Revenue Code, which deal with taxes that I doubt anybody in our group will ever owe. Okay. And if you owe them, pay them. All right. Because they're constitutional. But those are the only 2 sections out of all the administrative states, more than 500 agencies, that have anything to do with you after you file this paperwork. And I know you may find that hard to believe, but in my experience, 11 years now, they recognize this. We've got people driving on nothing but a passport card on cars that don't have state plates on it, but have private plates. They get pulled over. They look at all their stuff and they go, well, have a nice day. Be careful. Okay. So this is happening. It is real, even though you may find it hard to believe. These guys, what I've come to understand over all these years and dealing with them for so long, is that it's nothing but the Wizard of Oz. You got the old shriveled up guy behind the curtain, and we're like the little Cairn Terrier Toto that comes and grabs the curtain and pulls it back to expose him. They got no power except the power you give them through this fraud they've gone so long and so intricately set up so that they can ask you 2 questions. Are you a citizen of the United States? Are you a resident? How many times have you been asked those questions throughout your life? What did you always answer? And you always had to sign something. So what they're really asking you is, with the first one, are you okay with the fraud we committed in March the 9th of 33 when we switched the systems and put your relatives in as a surety? You say yes, answer and sign it. The second one is, do you give us the consent to govern you in this status? And you said yes, and you signed it. The power they've got is the power they've derived from tricking you to answer those questions yes, and not knowing how to get out of it. Not even knowing what it is. Not even knowing what it is, really.
And not knowing exactly what the implications of the questions are. The 2 questions are you a resident? And are you a United States citizen? Well, anybody that looks at those questions is going to think, well, of course I'm a citizen. I was born here. So they yes. And then, are you a resident? Well, I'm not filling out this form from Eastern Europe here. Just check. So
people, I mean, the title of my book is From Sovereign to Serf. The real title, that was added at the last minute because there was a conflict. The real title was Government by the Treachery and Deception of Words. And that's what we've got right here. These words, and they're using your subconscious and planning in an opposite definition in your subconscious mind. Your subconscious and your conscious, because your consciousness is aware that's not the right definition, but now your consciousness and subconscious are not working together, and it disempowers you. There's a great biblical verse in the New Testament, James 1:8, and it says, a double-minded man is uncertain in all of his ways. Not part of his ways, not some of his ways, all of his ways. And this is how they've made you double-minded. So we automatically know where the answers are 180 degrees. Now, if you want to unwind your insanity, if you're looking for some sanity, you go back to these key words: money, citizen of the United States, resident. There's a bunch of them. Okay. And every time you get to one of these words that's important that they've tied an opposite definition to, you go in your subconscious and replace it with the correct definition. Now, every time you do that, you get a little slice of consciousness back, and your subconscious and your consciousness are now working together. And as Bruce Lipton, the famous researcher, said, when that happens, it is empowering. And that's what happens to people when you move back under your common law rights and your creator connected, God given rights. And you will, but many of you, I can't say everybody because it depends on you to some extent, but you will become re-empowered, just like you're already seeing with Presley. Presley hadn't even been doing this very long. Okay. And I can already tell the empowerment in him at 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The principles of divide and conquer have been used on the individual level here, and healing that division and being really clear in what your real status is, not the status you've been tricked into agreeing into, is incredibly empowering. It's freeing.
And it will become more empowering as you go forward. Okay. Because, and this is why your freedom is not in filing a piece of paper. Your freedom is in learning the information. And that's the rich, rich sod that your re-empowerment plant and tree is going to grow out of. Okay. If you don't have that information in there and you can't defend your position, you really don't have anything, because nothing in life changes. In other words, your day-to-day life is not going to change after you file this paperwork. The change has got to be within you. And the way the change is set up and happens is within learning this information and you helping the information start the re-empowerment process. And at some point, the creator kicks in there and helps.
It re-empowers you to take control of your life again.
It does. Because now you're personally responsible. You don't have the sugar tit of the state, you know?
Okay. So the issue is when you are born to slaves. You were born, as long as your parents are 14th Amendment citizens of the United States. A slave, they are slaves, and a slave cannot own property.
Let's do, for the people that are new to this, let's differentiate and let's call it the English variety of slavery. Because when you say slave, they automatically think black slavery. And although that could have been a part of it, the one we're talking about is voluntary servitude. And that word voluntary is the key, because they've got you in this condition, because if they tell you what your status is, they're open tyrants. That's why they've gone to all this trouble and time to turn everything backwards so they can ask you those questions. And you can say, oh, well, Paul volunteered. He agreed with everything every time we ever asked him. So you consented. All we can, and well, they have to recognize this, take away your consent. You can. It's a voluntary system. They know it. They're the ones that set the system up. And now they got to recognize it, or take the mask off and be open tyrants. That's the checkmate position. This one sentence and one piece of paper, believe it or not, can put these monsters in. It's powerful, man. This is Excalibur. This is the Excalibur. If you don't know what Excalibur is, that's the sword that King Arthur pulled out of the stone that nobody else could. This is Excalibur.
So what happens is when a child is born, when a baby is born, and it doesn't matter if it's born in a hospital or not, if it's born to parents that are under voluntary servitude under the 14th Amendment, that child doesn't belong to the parents. That child automatically belongs to the state.
Yep.
And
on a hypothecated bankruptcy.
And that is how the CPS can walk in and carry your child out, and there isn't a damn thing you can do about it.
And that's one thing, because of this baby Cyrus situation, it caused me to rethink that. And we used to just tell people that had children, minor children, well, not to mess with it. But if the parents switched to nationals and they didn't switch the child as their parents, then CPS could feasibly come in and do that. I don't know if they ever would, okay, but that's a possibility. So we're at least putting that in front of parents now, and somebody's come up with an affidavit as a guardian, parent guardian, and filing those, and suggested people at least think about it.
And that automatically puts the child as a national.
Yes.
and out of their jurisdiction.
Correct.
Okay. So how does like there's horror stories, you don't want to mess with that national citizen thing or whatever, because you've paid into Social Security all your life. You've had a Social Security card and you file this paperwork and you're not going to get nothing for your retirement.
That's misinformation. I filed and opened my Social Security account 11 years ago with my affidavit, which I've been sticking in federal agencies' faces since 2007. Actually, before that, we filed with the IRS, but they're not technically a federal agency. If you don't know that, they're foreign. Okay.
But so there's no hook between
the
14th Amendment citizenship and the Social Security.
Let's approach this from the audience's standpoint. If you're new to this, especially if you're in front of your computer, I'm going to give you a website and a document to go to, and I'm going to read you some verbiage out of there. Paul, you could probably drag this up. You got it somewhere. The website is travel.state.gov, travel.state.gov. And once you've got that State Department website up, in the search field, you want to put in Certificate of Non-Citizen Nationality. I'll repeat it. I know there's a lot of letters there. Certificate of Non-Citizen Nationality. A number of options will pop up. Just pick the first one. And that is a policy statement and document from the State Department dealing with the head fake that they're giving us, because they're trying to hide this thing. Remember, I said it was done a lot of complexity. Well, this is part of it. Okay. And they've got another third political status called a non-citizen national, but that's only for American Samoans and a little bitty island called Swains Island. And those have all the rights that a state citizen would have, God-given rights, except they can't be 14th Amendment citizens, and we are both. So they call them non-citizen national. Now, that's who this policy document is dealing with. But to be able to feed you the lie, they've got to tell you the truth and set it up with the truth. So what you want to do when you get that document up, and I encourage you to do this because you might not believe it, because I'm just going to quote it to you, okay? I don't want you to think I'm lying to you. Go to the third paragraph, and the first 10 words of the third paragraph read, the INA, by the way, is the Immigration and Naturalization Act, big piece of legislation. It says, according to the INA, all, A-L-L, all U.S. citizens are U.S. nationals. Is that not what it says, Paul and Presley?
Yep.
That's exactly what it says.
So what they've done is taken the Jim Crow laws where they were separate but equal. One was subservient to the other, and they made both statuses equal. And they don't ask you if you're the national. They ask you if you're the citizen of the United States. And that's the first level of fraud here, is the fact that they're not giving you full disclosure. And they've gone to great lengths to hide this behind another newly created status for the American Samoans called a non-citizen national. So you not only get the involvement and the premeditation of not asking you the other status, but hiding the other one in front of it to hide it. So that's the first level of fraud, and it just continues to go layer after layer under that.
Okay, where can people find this link to this website?
Oh, that one we just went through?
Yeah.
That's the State Department website.
Okay.
Travel.state.gov.
Yeah, but there's a shortcut to it. Don't you have a matrixdocs.com website?
Well, I do, man. Thanks to some guy I met that put a lot of his time and effort into doing that. We've got that and a lot of this other information where if anything here has titillated you and you want to find out more, you're curious, then you go to thematrixdocs.com, and docs is D-O-C-S. So thematrixdocs.com, and there'll be more information there. You got a chance to shake a stick over for. It'll take you a little bit. There's a lot of interviews in there. There's a lot of supporting information. There's some sample documents on this affidavit we're talking about and that kind of stuff. And thank you publicly, Paul. This gentleman right here that's running the show is the one that did all this, and I appreciate you, buddy.
Well, I enjoyed doing it. And okay, so you've got some downloads on that page too. How to file a national affidavit. U.S. citizens are property. U.S. national state citizens are not. These are PDF files. Liberty U web capture with a lot of interesting information on it, valuable information. How to escape the matrix. That is actually a document that
goes over this.
It's a how-to.
Well, I mean, didn't you take that document and use it as the basis for your video, Presley?
Yeah, I did. And I went through the entire how-to process later on in the video after setting the whole thing up and giving all the supporting information you shared.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I want to talk about your video. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left of the show, but I want to talk about your video. You did a video, and the link to it will be in the description for this show, or you can go to thematrixdocs.com, and I will make sure that a link to that video is in that document where people can actually go and watch it. So you go through all of this, don't you? And the video is only like 20 minutes long. It's very straightforward.
It's a little longer than that, I think.
More like 55.
Oh, 55. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, excuse me.
there's an absurd amount of information here. It's a lot. It's simple, but a lot.
Trust me, you're going to be hitting the pause a couple of times, and you might even be like scrolling backward a little bit just to catch information twice. But it's all going to make perfect sense to you, and you're going to see how simple and how ingenious this really is.
Oh boy, our enemy is slick.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that we have to be slicker. We just have to know how to stand on our own power, how to make the declaration of what we will or will not accept for our life, and just stick to our guns. And guns not being the operative word, because nobody's talking about firearms here. But what does this get you out of? That's my question. The driver's license, is it still required?
Not necessarily, unless you're doing something like a commercial activity, then you should probably have one.
Okay. Insurance?
Nope.
Is it?
Yeah, this came out today. What on our show today? That we had an alternative to this for insurance. If you got a private car, yeah, you buy a bond. You go through insurance agencies and you pay $50 a year instead of $150 a month,
and you're covered.
Yes.
Okay.
Up to the amount of the bond.
That's
income tax.
I was asking more about.
Yeah, it was a good show today. You need to listen to the replay.
Yeah, I'll go back and watch that. I didn't get a chance.
Income tax.
Yeah, totally out of it, except for 2 obscure sections, one of which would never be applied because it doesn't make sense in the condition we're in. Don't have time to go into that now.
And does it open the door, once you are a national, or once you make your declaration, does it open the door for you to actually physically be able to get a land patent on your property? And instead of actually renting it from the powers that be, you can actually own it lock, stock, and barrel.
I talked tonight with one of my newer students who wanted a consult on an issue, and he's dealing with Ron Gibson right now. And Ron Gibson told him a dynamiting piece of information that I did not know. You can get a loyal title to your home even if you still got a mortgage on it.
Wow.
And once you do that, if they come and try and foreclose on the home, they can't legally set foot on the property.
So even if you still owe on it, if you file your paperwork and you become a national.
Well, he can do it without that, evidently. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to try and get a hold of Ron and get him back on the program. I've had him on there one time, but this is a guy old in the tooth like me and has been doing this for 30 years, and he's very, very good at it. And but it's one thing that came out of that conversation. There's nobody that he's apprenticing. if any of you are looking for something to do with your lives, especially if you got a little legal know-how in your background, that's something that there's not many people know how to do it. All right.
Okay.
That's to get total ownership of your land as a loyal title.
Excellent. Above and below the surface, that includes mineral and water rights as well.
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we're right up at the end of the show. I want to give a minute or so to each of you for closing comments. Presley, what do you want your generation? What do you want people to know?
I want people to know how great this country really is in its original state. I recently learned that which honestly I wish I had known sooner, but I recently learned that the Constitution was set up not to tell us what to do, but to tell the government what it can't do. And knowing that, I see how incredible our system is, how just and advanced of a country we are. It I didn't hit on this enough in the video. What's so fascinating to me is that this is returning to the original status. This is what US citizens or state citizens originally were. When we think of citizen, this is what we think of. This is the word they use when they mean citizen. That is not at all what we think. I want young people to know that they do have the power to make a difference. It's not hopeless. Our government isn't either hopelessly corrupt. It's not the Republicans are bad, the Democrats are bad. It's that we've been disempowered and we have to re-empower ourselves, re-empower the individual.
Excellent. Excellent. Roger, take us out.
They actually hijacked the government and took it off on another direction there. And what we've got to do, and we can do this easily and collectively, the more we get, is move back over into that original status before this hypothecated fraudulent bankruptcy. And if you do this, they totally lose control over you. Now, people ask me, well, what happens when they don't recognize that anymore? And it may get to that point. I don't think it will, because I think they've already lost. Okay. They'll never get control like they had in Bolshevik Russia when they really take the mask off. Okay. But should it not work any longer and they not recognize it, don't we all know what the rules are at that point? Okay. Ask yourself that question. I don't think it's going to get to that point. They respect this. And the more people see, as my teacher, John Benson, used to tell us from that stage when he'd give these long weekend seminars where I learned a lot of this stuff. And he'd say, the only way I can protect my liberty is to help you protect yours. And that's what's going on here. Okay. Excellent. And in numbers with this on our side, we have strength, and we're a group of strong individuals and not a herd of weak, manipulatable serfs and slaves.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you, Presley. It's been a great show. Roger, thematrixdocs.com. They can get more information about this and also links to your regular shows.
Yes, we have a weekday show 5 days a week. I'm on Republic Broadcasting now. I took the late Ralph Renterout slot on Sunday nights from 5 to 7 Central, and on places just like this occasionally, Sarah Westall, and our message is getting a lot more traction, and there's a lot of people looking for what we got.
Excellent. Gotta love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your being here. It's been a wealth of information and an eye opener for me, and my eyes were kind of open a little bit beforehand, even more so now. Thank you for joining us for Logical Thinking and the Think Tank. We'll catch you next time.
Standing tall and standing strong, defiant and looking on, no way down from our past.
I'm sure you've wondered how the government is able to chip away at our constitutional rights, despite all the checks and balances our founding fathers put in. Since early 2020, that question has been asked more than ever before. That question can only be answered with another question. Did you know that all U.S. citizens have dual citizenship? Today, using verifiable, factual information, as well as decades of experience and research, you are going to discover how United States citizens unknowingly volunteered to be the property of the United States government. More importantly, you are going to learn how to stop volunteering. Welcome to a comprehensive guide to becoming a state citizen, commonly known as a U.S. national and mistakenly known as a non-citizen national. Before we can begin, this is for educational purposes only. Nothing in this video is a call to action. I am not telling or suggesting anyone does anything, nor am I responsible for anyone else's actions. I am not discussing the topic of sovereign citizens or private citizens, as I stray clear from misinformation and disinformation. Credit must be given to Roger Sayles, the host of Radio Ranch, as most of this information is from his teachings. Roger has been so gracious as to share this with the world and to spend 2 hours every weekday answering people's questions on his radio show. You can find information on how to listen or call into his radio show in the description. Anyone who has any questions or comments on what I've discussed, feel free to leave a comment below, and if it goes beyond the scope of this video, be sure to ask Roger on his show. Also, the U.S. National Telegram group is linked down below as well. When the United States of America was founded, it was the only country in recorded human history, possibly other than the Roman Republic, that recognized and protected God-given, inalienable rights to freedom. The fatal flaw was the acceptance of slavery. You will see shortly how the Civil War, which we are told ended slavery, was used to enslave all Americans. But first we must discuss what it was like to be a free American before the war. As most know, the Constitution for the United States of America secured citizens of the states inalienable rights given by their creator. All government and legal action had to abide by the rules set out in the Constitution, and still does, including common law, which the Founding Fathers adopted from England. Common law means that when a Supreme or Appellate Court makes a ruling on how to interpret a law, that decision is applied across the state or country depending on the jurisdiction of that court. Jurisdiction is another concept that's important to understand. Jurisdiction is defined as the power to make decisions. For example, the United States Supreme Court only has that power to make decisions for citizens and residents of the United States. It cannot decide what happens to a Brazilian citizen residing in Brazil. Most who have read and understand the system of government set up by the Constitution are amazed by how just and free it is. So how is it possible that it has corrupted into the system you see today? Is this system unconstitutional? Fortunately, it is constitutional, and that's why the courts have allowed it to continue to play out. I say fortunately because that shows the system still works. They must abide by its rules, and that must mean that there is a way out. So let's find out how. In some interpretations, the Civil War was not a war over slavery, like many have been led to believe. It was a war over states' rights. I'm sure some of you instantly had alarm bells ringing when I made that statement. Due to media propaganda perpetrated by the federal government, one could look into Operation Mockingbird, many immediately associate that interpretation with racism and slavery, as if the Northerners were altruistic, loving people that were fed up with the racist Democrats in the South. They then spread the lie that the parties switched to explain why the Republicans are now the racist ones. The harsh reality is the Civil War had much less to do with slavery than we're led to believe. Many politicians from both sides were and still are racist, and they've worked together to enslave all Americans, regardless of skin color. After the Civil War, the 13th and the 14th Amendments were instituted. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolished slavery by stating, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." The word "their" being plural, as the jurisdiction is of the several states. Obviously, voluntary servitude is omitted. A free person would have every right to serve whatever or whomever they please. That also means that you would have to be able to stop volunteering for it to remain constitutional. Before we discover how to stop volunteering to be the slaves of the United States government, let's see how we were tricked into doing so in the first place. The 14th Amendment allowed all people born in the United States to become citizens by stating, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." There are three important things to notice in that statement. First, this amendment is referring to a single jurisdiction, as it's referring to the level of a singular federal government. This is distinctly different from the reference to several jurisdictions in the 13th Amendment. The importance of this will become clear shortly. Second, it says, "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof," not "are subject to the jurisdiction thereof," meaning people can be born here or naturalized without being subject to the United States federal government's jurisdiction. How that can be lies in the rest of the sentence, where it says, "citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." What happened here is the creation of a new class of citizenship. Before the 14th Amendment, a citizen of one of the several states was automatically a citizen of the United States of America. There was no such thing as a citizen of the United States federal government. People born in Washington, D.C. were not citizens. Again, the only status was a state citizen. To understand this dual citizenship, let's read some court rulings. If at any point you'd like to ponder or read these rulings for yourself, feel free to pause. They will all be on screen. The ruling on Tashiro v. Jordan states that there is a citizenship of the United States and a citizenship of a state. The ruling on Kitchens v. Steele states a citizen of the United States is a citizen of the federal government. The ruling on Gardina v. Board of Registrars of Jefferson County states there are then, under our Republican form of government, two classes of citizens, one of the United States and one of the state. The ruling on U.S. v. Anthony states the term resident and citizen of the United States is distinguished from a citizen of one of the several states, in that the former is a special class of citizen created by Congress. Remember that term resident. It'll be important later. I will use the term U.S. citizen, federal citizen, and 14th Amendment citizen interchangeably, as you can now see that they are one and the same. It is evident, then, that there is a federal and a state citizenship. So can someone be one without being the other? These next court rulings will make that clear. The ruling on McDonnell v. the state says, he was not a citizen of the United States. He was a citizen and a voter of the state. One may be a citizen of a state and yet not a citizen of the United States. The same U.S. v. Anthony case from earlier also stated in the ruling, an individual can be a citizen of one of the several states without being a citizen of the United States. Cross versus the Board of Supervisors ruled that both before and after the 14th Amendment to the federal Constitution, it has not been necessary for a person to be a citizen of the United States in order to be a citizen of his state. I can hear you thinking, okay, I believe you. What does it matter though? Do I want to be solely a state citizen and not a citizen of the federal government? What's the difference? To answer those questions, we must read some far more interesting court rulings. This is where it gets juicy. The ruling on Belmont versus the town of Gulfport stated, taxpayers are not state citizens. U.S. versus Slater decided in its ruling, unless the defendant can prove he is not a citizen of the United States, the IRS has the right to inquire and determine a tax liability. Before I get into why a state citizen doesn't have to pay taxes, you must understand the difference in the rights of a federal and state citizen. In the Supreme Court ruling on Jones v. Temer, it was decided the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment protects very few rights because it neither incorporates the Bill of Rights nor protects all rights of individual citizens. Instead, this provision protects only those rights peculiar to being a citizen of the federal government. It does not protect those rights which relate to state citizenship. You heard that right. The Bill of Rights is not protected for U.S. citizens, for 14th Amendment federal citizens. Want more proof? In the case of Hogg v. CIO, it was decided the first 8 amendments have uniformly been held not to be protected from state action by the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment. In the ruling on the case of Twining v. New Jersey, it was decided the right to trial by jury in civil cases guaranteed by the 7th Amendment, and the right to bear arms guaranteed by the 2nd Amendment have been distinctly held not to be privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. And in effect, the same decision was made in respect of the guarantee against prosecution, except by indictment of a grand jury, contained in the 5th Amendment, and in respect of the right to be confronted with witnesses, contained in the 6th Amendment. It was held that the indictment made indispensable by the 5th Amendment and trial by jury guaranteed by the 6th Amendment were not privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, as those words were used in the 14th Amendment. We conclude, therefore, that the exemption from compulsory self-incrimination is not a privilege or immunity of national or federal citizenship guaranteed by this clause of the 14th Amendment. That is absolutely shocking. What rights do U.S. citizens have then? Well, the Supreme Court ruling on U.S. v. Valentine will tell us. It states, the only absolute and unqualified right of a United States citizen is to residence within the territorial boundaries of the United States. That's it. That is the one right of a United States citizen. All else is a privilege that can be taken away at any time. It's starting to make sense how they're able to do all that we are seeing happen in the world, how they can punish us for victimless crimes and tax us on everything we own. What has happened here is that we've switched from the jurisdiction of constitutional law to the jurisdiction of commercial law, the law of merchants. Shortly after the passing of the 14th Amendment, the United States incorporated. When you hear United States, that is the corporation. When you hear United States of America, that is the original country. Notice that the words United and States are not capitalized because they are describing the states rather than referring to a specific entity, because the jurisdiction was of multiple states. More capitalization
is often a sign of corporate jurisdiction, as that is a single entity. It's a proper noun. They also created this change on a state level. All the state governments, like California state, for example, were incorporated, and this time they began with an uppercase S for state of, like in state of California, as opposed to California state, where the state was lowercase. I bet you didn't know that the state of California is not based in Sacramento like California state was. The state of California is based in Washington, D.C., along with all other 49 state of governments. The original governments are still there. They are just overlaid by this corporation. All the original government positions still exist. They are just empty. After creating these changes, the United States gave the former slaves U.S. citizenship, which guaranteed them civil rights rather than constitutional rights. As you've seen, there is only one absolute right U.S. citizens have access to. The rest are privileges. All civil rights are privileges. They slowly made every new child a federal citizen through their birth certificates until every state citizen was also a federal citizen. You just saw with the names of the states and country that the capital letters are often a sign of the corporate entity. Ever wondered why names are in all capital letters on a birth certificate or a driver's license or a social security number? So why would the government want to make everyone a United States citizen as well? Let's read the last two court cases for the answer. In the ruling on Wheeling Steel Corp versus Fox, it was stated, therefore, the U.S. citizens residing in one of the states of the Union are classified as property and franchises of the federal government as an individual entity. In the ruling on Hendrick versus Maryland, it was decided a U.S. citizen, upon leaving the District of Columbia, becomes involved in interstate commerce as a resident does not have the common law right to travel of a citizen of one of the several states. You heard that right. U.S. citizens are property, and if they're outside of D.C., that property is in interstate commerce. Of course, it's all about power and money. They can do just about whatever they want to U.S. citizens, other than infringe on their sole right to residing here. You've probably heard the statement, property can't own property. That's why they can tax U.S. citizens on all their income and property. They don't really own it. Taxes are like their rent and interest. That sure gives them a lot of money, as does all the debt they've built up. I'm sure you've wondered who the government is $30 trillion in debt to. Some of you know it's the Federal Reserve Bank, which truly isn't a government agency. What sort of bank gives out loans without collateral? Well, it turns out U.S. citizens, since they are property, are the collateral. That is why our birth certificates look like warehouse receipts. That is why our birth certificates and our driver's licenses and our social security cards all have bonds against them. If a state citizen is having a child, it is highly recommended to not sign their birth certificate and establish their nationality in other ways. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. How could someone who is already a U.S. citizen get out of this? Can people reclaim their rights and stop paying taxes? I said it's constitutional, so people must be able to just stop volunteering, right? Well, that's right. But to understand how you can get out, how anyone could get out, you must understand the three statuses that exist in this country and be wary of enormous mistakes some people have made. They've done their best to make this as tricky and confusing as possible, and to take that further, they had to add in a third status and change the name of the original one. With the Immigration and Nationality Act, or INA, what used to be called a state citizen, or a citizen of the United States of America, was covered up by the term U.S. national. I will use these three terms interchangeably: state citizen, citizen of the United States of America, and U.S. national. You've seen now that one can be a state citizen or U.S. national without being a U.S. citizen, or one can be both a U.S. national and a U.S. citizen. This and the third status was further described in the INA as referenced on the Department of State website in this article titled Certificates of Non-Citizen Nationality, the link to which is in the description below. The third paragraph states, as defined by the INA, all U.S. citizens are U.S. nationals, but only a relatively small number of persons acquire U.S. nationality without becoming U.S. citizens. This further confirms that one can be a U.S. national, which was previously referred to as a state citizen, without being a U.S. citizen. The third status is a non-citizen national, which this article explains. Such a person is not a citizen of one of the United States of America or of the United States Federal Corporation, yet is still considered a national. Currently, the only such people are the people of American Samoa and Swains Island. By not giving these people birthright citizenship, the government was able to claim that U.S. nationality only exists to preserve these indigenous cultures. We all know how much the government cares about indigenous cultures here in America. This is so important to them that when the U.S. District Court for the District of Utah ruled in 2020 that American Samoans should be given U.S. citizenship by birthright, both the United States federal government and the American Samoan government contested the ruling within 24 hours. You can check the description for an article on where that case went. Using this third status to hide the original citizenship not only worked, as people believe that a national is an American Samoan, it also caused some problems for people attempting to become U.S. nationals. Some people mistakenly revoked both of their citizenships and chose to become a non-citizen national. By doing so, they lost their chance to reclaim their constitutional rights and had to either leave the country, go to American Samoa, or apply for naturalization. These are likely the horror stories you may have heard about becoming a national. The words we use are very important. I advise avoiding making the mistake of giving up all citizenship. Now that that's clear, I can discuss the ways people have continued to affirm the false presumption that was assigned to them at birth that they are U.S. citizens. The main way they've done this is by asking specific questions anytime U.S. citizens have gone to court, wanted a driver's license, started a bank account, etc. The first of which is, are you a U.S. citizen? Which we now know means, are you a former slave claiming civil rights, or a state citizen giving up their constitutional rights to claim civil rights? Phrase like that, I'm sure just about everyone would answer no. When asked where they are a citizen of, a U.S. national would say, of the United States of America. As they still are a citizen of the United States of America, they are just no longer a citizen of the United States Incorporated. The second question often asked is, are you a resident? This is another word game. Most normally would think resident is a geographical term, that it's about where you reside. In this context, though, it has a different meaning. A resident was a term created to give the federal government jurisdiction over the former slaves in order to protect them from their state by having them just be residents in that state. So now we see that the question means, are you residing in one of the several states and seeking the federal government's protection from that state? Phrase like that, again, almost no one would answer yes to that question. So when asked where they are resident of, A U.S. national would avoid using the term resident altogether or reside altogether and say something along the lines of, I'm currently living in this state, or on this state, really. Another trick they use is asking you if you are that person or a person. This is mostly used in court cases. Obviously, you are a person, and you will get in a lot of trouble if you say you are not, because you are. But in this case, this is a legal term referring to United States property. A U.S. national would say, I am not that person. The words we use are very important. You must know their word games to stop playing their game. The common definition to words are very different to those they use, which are found in Black Law's dictionary. If you are choosing to get a copy of Black's Law Dictionary, I highly recommend one of the first 4 versions, as a lot of the definitions have been altered in later versions. By setting this system up like this, they have convinced people to agree to giving up their rights and becoming property by choosing U.S. citizenship over their state citizenship. To learn more of their word games, feel free to watch the video I've linked in the description. The other primary way they legitimize the false presumption is through voting. State citizens that are not also federal citizens do not have access to the privilege of running or voting in federal elections. Voting in federal elections is agreeing to the federal corporate jurisdiction. Below is a link to cancel voter registration. I've heard nationals can become an elector rather than a voter, though I know nothing about this. If you'd like more information on that, Roger, the host of Radio Ranch, or someone on his show might know something about that. Anyway, this topic brings up the question, are there any other privileges that U.S. citizens have that U.S. nationals don't? Other than voting, the primary privileges are financial incentives given out by the federal government, which are truly trivial compared to how much U.S. citizens pay in taxes. And that leads us perfectly to everyone's favorite part. State citizens are not subject to the jurisdictional statements of codes or mandates, such as the United States Code or state penal codes. That does mean that nationals don't need to register or get permits for their firearms. This is because the penal codes refer to persons, and we know now that nationals are not those persons. As for the United States Code, the titles claim jurisdiction over U.S. citizens and residents. Everyone's favorite code, Title 26, Internal Revenue Code, has a little extra terminology in there. Let's read it together to understand what taxes U.S. nationals are liable to pay. A link to this page is in the description. Title 26 states, Section 1 of the Code imposes an income tax on the income of every individual who is a citizen or resident of the United States, and, to the extent provided by Section 871B or 877B, on the income of a non-resident alien individual. As you can see, non-resident alien individuals are only liable to 2 sections of the income tax, which happen to be 2 incredibly irrelevant sections, 2 incredibly irrelevant taxes that the average person will never pay. But would a U.S. national be considered a non-resident alien? They certainly aren't citizens or residents of the United States, so that covers the non-resident part. But what makes them alien? Well, if an alien is a citizen of a different country, and nationals are citizens of the United States of America, which we now know to be a different country than the United States, then, it seems, U.S. nationals are non-resident aliens as far as the income tax is concerned. Therefore, the average state citizen is not liable to pay income tax. So that clears up a huge portion of taxes, yet property, sales, and corporate taxes remain. U.S. citizens can be taxed on their property because they don't truly own it, as property can't own property. Nationals have the ability to raise the patent to their land, which gives them the highest jurisdiction over it, making them exempt from taxes and from the need to follow building codes and to get permits. That is quite an in-depth subject, so I'll leave it to the expert, Ron Gibson. Feel free to research his work, lectures, and interviews if you're interested, though be careful in researching this, as there is a large amount of false information attempting to defame him and his work. Anyway, let's move on to sales tax. Some may be aware that companies are liable to pay sales tax, not individuals. The companies choose to add it on to the price at the point of sale in order to make their products look cheaper while browsing. Therefore, one usually can't get out of sales tax, but anyone, regardless of if they're a national, can request that the company pays the tax without adding it onto the price. They may not always do this, but it's worth a try with larger purchases like a vehicle. Finally, there are corporate taxes. Since corporations are part of the corporate system the US is built on, they must pay taxes. Luckily, I'm sure there are ways that a state citizen business owner could raise their salary to the point that the business has no income to pay taxes on, and then they could use that money to reinvest into the business. There is also the option of creating a private membership organization, also known as an unincorporated business. If you're interested in that topic, further research into corporate taxes or unincorporated organizations is recommended. So some may be wondering, if a national is no longer subject to that commercial law, how can they sign commercial contracts without giving up their rights? Is stating that you're not a US citizen enough? They won't even know what that is. So there happens to be a part of the Uniform Commercial Code that will help us out here. This code can be used by both federal and state citizens. UCC, meaning Uniform Commercial Code, 1-308, is a section of the Uniform Commercial Code that allows people to sign documents with the words, "without prejudice," in their signature to reserve their rights. It's like saying, my common law supersedes your commercial law. Some people choose to add UCC 1-308 or just 1-308 to their signatures, usually if there isn't much space, or sometimes they add it after the words "without prejudice" to be safe. The code also provides the option to sign the words "under duress" or U.D. meaning you're being forced into signing. That one is best used in all dealings with law enforcement or any government employees or agencies, though we'll get into that later. It's recommended to allow the signature to bleed into the statement in case anyone attempts to write it out. Finally, what you've all been waiting for. Now that we understand why a person would choose to do so and what the repercussions would be, it is time to learn how someone can rebut the false presumption of federal citizenship and regain access to constitutional rights. Let's quickly return to the page about non-citizen nationality from the Department of State's website to see how. At the bottom of the page, it is stated, any person who becomes a citizen of the United States solely by virtue of the provisions in Section 301 applying to those born in or residing in the Northern Mariana Islands may within 6 months after the effective date of the section or within 6 months after reaching the age of 18 years, whichever date is later, become a national but not a citizen of the United States by making a declaration under oath before any court established by the Constitution or laws of the United States or any other court of record in the Commonwealth in the form as follows. Quote, I, blank, being duly sworn, hereby declare my intention to be a national but not a citizen of the United States. End quote. Now that's crowded in a lot of unnecessary and misleading information, so I'll simplify it for you. Any U.S. citizen can, with one sentence declaration put into their records, declare themselves a national but not a citizen of the United States. That sentence can be altered or added to, but must be changed carefully. Once again, if the terms revoke my citizenship or anything similar is used, that could be misinterpreted as both citizenship statuses, and that person would be left as a non-citizen national. So now that we've seen how easy it is to get out, it's become very clear why they've gone to such lengths to hide this and set up so many traps and word games on the way. Let's go through the process step by step. This is being shared for educational purposes only. I am not encouraging anyone to do this. Your servitude is your choice. A collection of all the sample documents used will be linked in the description. The first step is signing an affidavit in front of a notary. The notary confirms a person's identity. Most people choose to have about 5 originals notarized, as they will send out 3 of them and keep 2 for themselves, usually in separate locations in case one is destroyed, just to be safe. Let's go over a sample affidavit. Only that sentence referenced above is required, but most choose to add more to make it entirely clear to the other organizations they'll send this to, which might not know that much about this topic. This document is titled Citizenship Evidence Affidavit. It states, you'd put your full name here, being of sound mind and lawful age, do solemnly declare, 1. The first clause of the 14th Amendment states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. 2. The first clause of the 14th Amendment does not say all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. 3. The first clause of the 14th Amendment contains 2 requirements for United States citizenship. A. That a person be born or naturalized in the United States, and B. That a person be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. 4. I am not restricted by the 14th Amendment, because I receive no protection from it, and I have no reciprocal obligation to a 14th Amendment allegiance or sovereignty. Thus, I owe no obedience to anyone under the 14th Amendment. United States v. Wong Kim Ark, 169 U.S. 649, 1898. Thus, I am not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The first 3 statements set up the argument, and then that 4th one that we read has a case in it that is referenced that backs up the statement in the 4th section. Let's continue. 5. The Department of State document, Certificates of Non-Citizen Nationality, located at https://content/travel/en/legal/travel legal considerations/US citizenship/certificates non-citizen nationality.html says, in part, in the 3rd paragraph, quote, Section 101A21 of the INA defines the term national as a person owing permanent allegiance to a state. Section 101A22 of the INA provides that the term national of the United States includes all U.S. citizens, as well as persons who, though not citizens of the United States, owe permanent allegiance to the United States, non-citizen nationals. 6. I hereby declare that I am a national but not a citizen of the United States. So number 5 proves the existence of the national status, and then that status is declared in number 6. Let's continue. 7. This affidavit is submitted to legally and lawfully rebut the fraudulent legal presumption that I am a citizen of the United States under the scope and purview of the 14th Amendment's federal citizenship, and that such federal citizenship grants me civil rights. 8. I am non-resident to the residency of the 14th Amendment, an alien to the citizenship thereof. Therefore, I am not subject to the jurisdictional statements of the United States Code. 9. as the tax imposed in 26 USC 1 pursuant to 26 CFR 1.1-1 is on citizens and residents as contemplated in the 14th Amendment. It is not applicable to me, as I am neither a citizen nor a resident. Notwithstanding the fact that I may have, previously, filed U.S. individual income tax returns. Such filings were done by mistake, as I was unaware that these filings were mandated only for citizens and residents of the United States, as contemplated by the 14th Amendment. 10. Furthermore, I am not a resident of any state under the 14th Amendment, and hereby publicly disavow any contract, form, agreement, application, certificate, license, permit, or other document that I or any other person may have signed expressly or by acquiescence that would grant me any privileges and thereby ascribe to me rights and duties under a substantive system of law other than the constitutional contract of 1787 for the United States of America and of the constitutions for the several states of the Union, exclusive of the 14th Amendment. 11. I reiterate that I have made the above determinations and made this declaration under no duress, coercion, promise of reward or gain, or undue influence, and of my own free will, with no mental reservation and with no intent to evade any legal duty under the laws of the United States or any of the several states. 12. At any time, I reserve the right to amend and correct, wherever necessary, or to rescind and revoke this document. This line allows fixing the affidavit, or even changing the status back if one misses being the property of the United States. It was Benjamin Franklin who said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Let's continue. Number 13. I invite any individual who has reason to believe that I am in error in my facts and conclusions above to file an affidavit stating the contrary facts and conclusions, signed under penalty of perjury, before a person authorized by law to administer and witness an oath. This line is important to understand. To disagree with the affidavit, they must also sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury. Since everything in it is factually true, they will never do that unless they want to go to court. Finally, it states, I declare, under penalty of perjury, under the laws of the United States of America, that the foregoing is true and correct. Once the notary instructs to do so, one would then sign this document, print their name at the bottom, and add the date. It is not necessary to sign this one without prejudice, as it's not a contract with another party, but can be done anyway, just in case. On the back, there is a California jurat for the notary to fill out. How each state handles jurats and notarized documents may differ, so that could require more research for other states. It is important to print it double-sided to assure the proof of notarization stays with the document. Once that is complete, one would mail out an original copy of the affidavit, one of their original 5, to the Department of State or to the Secretary of State themselves to put them on notice of the new status. The Department of State handles citizenship, as they are the one who hands out passports. Putting them on notice is most important, as they have the highest government jurisdiction over citizenship. Most mail this out with a certified return receipt. This will require them to mail back signed proof that they have received the letter. In the package would also be a cover letter, not stapled on. Sending the affidavit with just a cover letter is considered sending it cold or naked. They cannot respond to a naked affidavit with anything other than their own affidavit, which we discussed why they won't do. Therefore, this is the ideal start, so it's already on file, and all future notices or applications must be accepted because the status has already been changed. Getting nothing in response but a return receipt is a sign that everything was done right, as they have nothing left to say. Here is a sample cover letter. The highlighted parts are to be edited for each individual. An important part to point out is the statement, notice to the principal is notice to the agent. Notice to the agent is notice to the principal. This essentially means that notifying the head of the department is notice to all of the employees, and notifying an employee is notice to the head of the department. Another important thing to point out is at the bottom where it says to add a national passport number or social security number. This is optional, but will make the process much faster and will be important if you have a very common name so they can identify you. The passport number can be from an expired passport, and I would imagine the passport number would be ideal for every agency other than the IRS, who would likely prefer social security numbers. The IRS is put on notice in a very similar way. Once the tracking number confirms that the Department of State has received the notice, one can proceed to noticing the IRS and other agencies. The cover letter and package would be addressed to the IRS Commissioner and CC'd to the Department of Treasury and Franchise Tax Board of a state. Some states allow other states to handle collecting federal taxes, so research is required. It is recommended to send the Commissioner one of the original 5 affidavits and to give the Department of Treasury and Franchise Tax Board a photocopy, which would be double-sided as well. Here's a sample of the cover letter. Notice that it says, "Legal lawful notice, not to be construed as a filing." This part is very important, which is why it's highlighted. It's not meant to be edited like the other highlighted portions. The IRS can charge $5,000 for a frivolous filing fee. By clarifying that this is a notice and not a filing, they are prevented from doing that. Along with those 3 letters, there are a slew of other agencies people choose to put on notice with copies of their affidavit. Remember, these copies must be photocopied front and back to include the jurat. The main agencies people choose are the local agencies. The cover letter would be addressed to the state's Attorney General, and some examples of who would be CC'd are the District Attorney, the County Sheriff, the State Highway Patrol Commissioner, State Highway Patrol Chief of the local division, and local police departments. Some are recommending noticing the County Medical Examiner-Coroner, as they may have higher jurisdiction than the sheriff in some areas. It is even becoming common to put the County Health Director, as there have been attempts to give them a higher jurisdiction than the sheriff as well. Here is an example list of who people can choose to CC if they lived in Los Angeles County, for example. Some cities have their own police department separate from the LAPD, so you'll see them listed there as well. Finally, if a national pays payroll taxes, they tend to put their employer on notice as well with an affidavit copy. If they require filling a W-4 form, it's signed without prejudice with your signature. The word exempt in all capital letters is written in the box asking for income, and N/A, meaning not applicable, in the boxes such as those asking for your social security number, dependents, and marital status. Around 2 weeks after the Department of State has received the affidavit, most nationals choose to get a form of identification that reflects their status. This is done through the passport. They either apply for a passport or renew their passport by mail if eligible. In both cases, an original affidavit, one of the original 5 copies, is put between the pages of the application. Since the Department of State has the affidavit on file already, they cannot reject the application for the inclusion of the affidavit because the affidavit is already on record, and therefore it is true in regards to your citizenship. Some people cannot renew and must apply for a new one. In this case, some say to avoid using the birth certificate as proof of identity because it's proof of the identity as a corporate entity, though the affidavit may be enough to counteract that. If required, that you have to go in person and apply for a new passport. Nationals are sure to say they would like a passport that reflects their status, and they say nothing else, just leave it at that. It is important to also get a passport card. This works as an ID, as well as for travel by land or sea in much of North America. A passport book can be obtained as well in that same application for those that like to be able to travel internationally. The book and card will look identical to anyone else's, The only difference is what shows up on the computer when it is scanned. I cannot confirm this next claim, as it is anecdotal, but it's still interesting to hear. One national said that when their passport was scanned at the airport, they were sent in line, and a minute later the person ran over to get them, apologizing that they'd been sent to the normal line. They were then sent to the express line for free. It's speculated they may be classified as a diplomatic courier in that system. They technically are foreign citizens, as they are foreign to the United States corporation, so there is a chance this is true. Either way, it is much more common to use this to make a difference in a much more important situation. The primary purpose of the passport card is to be the new identification card. For example, if a police officer is to pull a national over, the national would hand them the card and ask them to scan it as a passport card. 9 out of 10 times, the police officer will let them go. A government software developer claims that this is because their file will say, "Do not arrest" or "Do not detain" in big red letters. That again is anecdotal, but the reason isn't too important, as the result has been verified repeatedly by nationals all over the country. Occasionally, the officer will still write a ticket, which would, of course, be signed with "Under Duress" or UD 1-308 with your signature. When this gets to the district attorney's office, they open up the national's file, see the national is out of their jurisdiction, and throw the ticket away. One could also send them back the ticket within 3 days, just to be safe, as any contract can be canceled within 72 hours. At the top, the word "rescind" would be written, followed by the date and a signature. Some nationals choose to keep their driver's license, just in case, as a person does technically need one to drive a registered vehicle. In some states, they will only give licenses to U.S. citizens. In California, though, likely because of how many illegal immigrants live here, people have noticed that when pressing that they are not a U.S. citizen on the computer at the DMV, the question, "Are you a resident?" disappears. They then sign it UD 1-308 and have no problems. Many choose to return their driver's license and their license plates to the DMV, asking for their accounts to be closed and canceled and the data removed. The DMV can be very combative, so it's often recommended to provide as little information as possible. One could simply say that they and their property will be leaving the jurisdiction of their state's DMV. Those people that do this choose to buy private plates for their car. Some examples are on screen, and links to private plate sellers are in the description below. Keep in mind, this can only be done by someone who owns their car and is not financing or leasing it. It is important to have the bill of sale as proof of ownership. People often choose to keep their insurance if they already have it. Otherwise, there are insurance companies that will insure non-registered vehicles. Someone recommended Dairyland Insurance, but I personally cannot speak for them. There is another word game here that can be confusing, so be sure to ask Roger Sayles if you feel lost. Technically, people are required to have a license to drive a motor vehicle. Nationals, though, have the right to travel in a private conveyance. That right to travel has been established by many court cases and was even referenced in the final court case we read together on citizens being involved in interstate commerce. It is important that national states that they are traveling in their private conveyance in response to being told they need a license or license plates to drive a motor vehicle. The last few steps we're going to speak about here are entirely optional, but beginning to become very popular in this community. Some nationals choose to file a Freedom of Information Act for a copy of their Department of State administrative file to ensure their affidavit is in it. It is common to wait 4 to 6 months. Some nationals choose to authenticate their birth certificate to take it out of the federal jurisdiction. Personally, I only see that as necessary for when one has to prove their identity with the birth certificate. Finally, a national can continue to pay into and collect Social Security, yet many choose to cancel their Social Security number and operate using trusts or alternative numbers the IRS provides. For more information on the birth certificates and Social Security numbers, look through James C. Lovett's YouTube channel, linked in the description below. That was a comprehensive guide to state citizenship, U.S. nationality, and how U.S. citizens are property. Thank you for listening. I appreciate any feedback. Feel free to share this with anyone and everyone. You can use this as you please, as long as you link back to the original video so people can receive the complete information. Be sure to check the description for all the resources referenced. May we all be free.